Please subscribe to my channel. This is my sincere request to you. I assumed my father's threat to cut off my tuition was just another one of his control games. Then a one-way ticket arrived in the mail, accompanied by a stack of legal papers he demanded I sign the week of my sister's wedding. Seeing my signature on a six-figure loan I never authorized changed everything. I realized this was not a celebration of love. It was a trap, and I was the collateral. My name is Avery Alexander, and at 27 years old, I had successfully curated a life that existed 200 miles away from the blast radius of my family. I was a ghost in their machinery, a line item in my father's ledger, and I liked it that way. I was sitting in the back corner of the graduate library at Bristol University, surrounded by stacks of case studies and the comforting smell of old paper, when my phone began to buzz against the table. The screen lit up with the one contact name that could make my stomach drop through the floorboards. Father. He never called. He had people for that. If he needed to convey a message, it came through his secretary or via a curt with a subject line that read like a corporate memo. A phone call meant a deviation from the protocol. A phone call meant escalation. I stared at the vibrating device. I had 1 year left, just 1 year until I had the degree, the credentials, and the job offer that would allow me to sever the financial umbilical cord Dean Alexander had used to strangle me for the last decade. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I knew the cost of defiance. Dean did not leave voicemails. He levied fines. I slid my finger across the screen and brought the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I knew better than to interrupt his opening statement. "You are coming home," his voice said. It was not a question. It was the low, growly tone of a man who was used to the world bending to his architectural specifications. "Tuesday. The flight is already booked." "I can't," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my hand was gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles were turning white. "I have finals in 2 weeks, Dad. I have a thesis review on Thursday. I told Candace I would drive down for the ceremony on Saturday morning, but I can't do the whole week." There was a silence on the other end of the line. It was a heavy, calculated silence, the kind he used in boardrooms to make junior executives sweat through their dress shirts. "Avery," he said, and the way he said my name felt like he was tasting something spoiled. "This is your sister's wedding. It is the social event of the season. People are flying in from London, from Tokyo. The governor is confirmed. And you think your little thesis review takes precedence over the family reputation?" "It's my degree," I countered. "It's the investment you always talk about protecting." "Exactly," Dean said. The trap snapped shut. "I am paying for that degree. I am paying for that apartment. I am paying for the very air you are currently breathing at that overpriced institution. So here is the reality, Avery. You will be on that plane Tuesday morning. You will be at the rehearsal dinner. You will smile for the photographers. You will stand next to your sister and look like a supportive, grateful daughter." He paused, letting the next words gather weight. "If you are not in this house by Tuesday afternoon, I will contact the bursar's office at Bristol on Wednesday morning and cancel the check for your final year's tuition. I will cut the lease on your apartment. You will be destitute before the ink dries." The library suddenly felt very cold. The air conditioning hummed, indifferent to the fact that my entire future was being held hostage over a photo op. He wasn't bluffing. Dean Alexander never bluffed about money. He wielded it like a weapon. He knew I had no savings. He knew he had designed my life so that I was entirely dependent on his funding, precisely for moments like this. "I will be there," I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it belonged to someone else. "Good," he said. "Check your email for the itinerary. Don't embarrass us." The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, listening to the silence. The ultimatum hung in the air, toxic and absolute. I was not being invited to a wedding. I was being summoned to a performance. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message from Candace. My sister was 30 years old, 3 years my senior, and she had spent every single one of those years being the golden sun around which our family orbited. While I was the problem to be solved, Candace was the prize to be displayed. I opened the message. There was no greeting. No, "Hey, heard you're coming." No, "Can't wait to see you." Just a wall of text that looked more like a logistics manifest than a conversation with a sibling. Flight lands at 1:15. You need to Yuba to the estate. Mom's sold the Range Rover, so we're down a car. Once you get here, drop your bags and go to the bridal suite. I need you to steam the veils. Yes, plural. And organize the gift bags for the out-of-town guests. Graham's cousins are gluten-free, so make sure you check the labels on the snacks. Also, the florist is being difficult about the hydrangeas. You need to call them and threaten a bad Yelp review if they don't deliver by Thursday. Do not wear that awful gray cardigan you love. Wear something that doesn't look like you live in a library. See you then. I stared at the screen. I was not a sister. I was on paid labor. I was a prop designed to fill the negative space in her perfect picture. To Candace, I was simply an extension of the staff, only cheaper because she didn't have to tip me. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pack my bags, drive in the opposite direction, and live in my car if I had to. But I thought about the tuition. I thought about the thousands of dollars standing between me and the license that would finally set me free. If I ran now, I lost everything. If I played their game for one more week, just 7 days, I could survive. I typed back a single word. Okay, it was a lie. It wasn't okay, but it was the password to get me through the gate. I spent the next 2 days in a fugue state, packing my life into a carry-on suitcase. I told my professors I had a family emergency. In a way, it was true. The emergency was that my family was a sinking ship, and they were demanding I come aboard to help rearrange the deck chairs. The flight home was a blur of turbulence and anxiety. When I landed, the air in my hometown felt heavy and laden with the humidity of expectations. I took the ride share to the house, the estate as Dean insisted on calling it. It was a sprawling neo-colonial monstrosity that looked less like a home and more like a courthouse designed to intimidate defendants. As the car crunched up the gravel driveway, I saw the activity. Tents were being erected on the south lawn. A catering truck was parked near the garage. The place looked perfect, manicured, expensive. I dragged my suitcase to the front door. I didn't have a key. Dean had changed the locks 2 years ago for security, and I had never been given a new one. I rang the bell. The door was opened by my father. He looked older than I remembered, but not frailer. His hair was silver and perfectly coiffed, his suit tailored to within an inch of its life. He looked at me, not with affection, but with the critical eye of a director assessing a prop that had arrived late to set. "You're here," he said, stepping aside. "You're late. Candace has been asking for you." Flight was delayed. I lied. I walked into the foyer. The smell hit me instantly. Lees and floor wax, the scent of my childhood, the scent of repression. "Well, you're here now," Dean said, closing the door behind me. The lock clicked with a sound that felt final. "Try to look a little less like a funeral attendee. Avery, this is a celebration. We need energy. We need unity." He walked past me toward his study, his heels clicking on the marble. Then he stopped and turned back, as if remembering a minor detail. "Oh, and Avery," he said, his voice dropping to a casual, almost bored register. "Since you are here for the week, I have some paperwork on my desk I need you to take care of." I froze, my hand tightened on the handle of my suitcase. "Paperwork, just standard family trust maintenance," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Updates to the estate planning, liability waivers for the event, that sort of thing. Nothing major. I just need a few signatures while you are physically present. Saves us the notary fees later. We can knock it out tomorrow or Thursday." My internal radar pinged hard. Dean Alexander did not care about notary fees. He tipped waiters more than a notary cost, and he never did anything standard without a motive. "I'll look at it later," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Don't overthink it," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly, a flicker of the predator surfacing beneath the mask. "It is just housekeeping. Go help your sister. She's in the solarium having a meltdown about napkins." He disappeared into his study and closed the door. I stood alone in the foyer of the house that had never felt like home. I looked at the grand staircase, the portraits of our ancestors staring down with judgment, the sheer opulence that covered the rock beneath. They had prepared a script for me. I could feel it. I was the difficult one, the one who needed to be managed, the one who was lucky to be included. If I pushed back, if I complained about Candace's demands or Dean's threats, I would just be fulfilling the role of the bratty younger sister. They wanted me to be emotional so they could dismiss me. I walked to the guest powder room tucked under the stairs and locked the door. I needed a moment before I faced Candace. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. There were dark circles under my eyes, and my hair was frizzy from the flight. I looked like a victim. I turned on the cold water and splashed my face. The shock of the water made me gasp, but it cleared the fog. I grabbed a hand towel and dried my skin, staring hard at my reflection. Dean had threatened my future. Candace was treating me like a servant. And now there was this paperwork, a specific demand for my signature, buried under the chaos of a wedding. Why? Why was it so important that I be here, not just for the photos? Dean could have photoshopped me in if he really wanted to. He needed me here physically. He needed my hand on a pen. The threat about the tuition wasn't just leverage to get me to the wedding. It was leverage to get me to sign. I straightened my spine. I smoothed down my shirt. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, lily-scented air. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had dragged me back to submit, to bow my head and play the role of the grateful, indebted daughter. They thought I was here to beg for my tuition. I looked into my own eyes in the glass. If they wanted me to come here to bow, they were going to be disappointed. I would play their game. I would smile. I would steam the veils. I would reorganize the gift bags. I would be the perfect obedient soldier, but I would keep my eyes open. I would read every single word of that paperwork, and I would find out exactly why Dean Alexander was so desperate for my signature that he had to blackmail me to get it. I unlocked the bathroom door and stepped out into the hallway. Avery. Candace's voice shrieked from the back of the house. Where are you? The ribbon samples are a disaster. Coming, Candace, I called back. My voice was calm, steady. I wasn't here to celebrate a marriage. I was here to survive a war, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let them win. The solarium was a glass cage designed to trap heat, and at 2:00 in the afternoon, it felt less like a room in a home and more like an interrogation chamber. Candace was standing amidst a sea of ribbon spools, holding two nearly identical shades of pink satin against the sunlight. To the untrained eye, they were both pink. To Candace, the difference between them was evidently worth a full psychiatric breakdown. She didn't look up when I entered. She just held out a hand, expecting me to place an iced latte in it. I didn't have one. I hadn't been sent to get coffee. I had been sent to fix a crisis that existed entirely in her head. This was the dynamic. It had always been the dynamic. In the Alexander household, roles were assigned at birth and calcified by time. Candace was the asset. I was the liability. Candace was the show pony, groomed for the winner's circle. Her coat brushed until it gleamed, her diet monitored, her path cleared of obstacles. I was the workhorse, kept in the back stable, fed just enough to keep pulling the plow, but never enough to jump the fence. It wasn't always this blatant. Before our mother died, there had been a buffer. Mom had been a soft negotiator, smoothing over Dean's edges and filtering his demands. But when cancer took her 10 years ago, the filter vanished. Dean didn't know how to parent. He only knew how to manage. He treated grief like a fiscal quarter with poor returns, something to be restructured and moved past. He consolidated his emotional assets into Candace and liquidated his patience with me. I watched my sister hyperventilate over the ribbons. It was almost impressive how she could occupy so much space without actually doing anything. She was the golden child, a title that sounds shiny, but is actually heavy. She had to be perfect. She had to marry well. She had to be the extension of Dean's ego. And because she could never fail, someone else had to be the repository for all the family's flaws. That was me, the scapegoat. If a vase broke in the hallway, it was assumed I had bumped it. If Candace got a speeding ticket, it was because I had upset her before she left the house. If the dinner roast was dry, it was because my presence at the table had ruined the mood. I became the vessel for everything that went wrong in the Alexander Empire. I remember the day I received my acceptance letter to a prestigious program in Chicago 3 years ago. It came with a full scholarship, not a partial waiver, but a full ride, tuition, room, board. It was my ticket out. It was freedom. I remembered running into Dean's study, shaking with excitement, placing the letter on his mahogany desk. He had read it once, his face impassive. Then he had looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "No." I had blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "No, it is free, Dad. It doesn't cost you a dime." "That is exactly the problem," he had said, tossing the letter back at me like it was junk mail. "Alexanders do not take handouts. We do not accept charity. If you go there on their dime, they own you. You will go where I send you, and I will pay for it. That way you remember who you answer to." He forced me to decline the scholarship. He forced me to attend Brystone, where he paid the bills directly. At the time, he framed it as family pride. Standing there in the solarium, watching Candace fret over satin, I finally understood the mechanics of it. It wasn't pride. It was a leash. If I had taken that scholarship, he would have had no leverage. He couldn't threaten to cut off funding that he didn't provide. He had purchased my dependence for $50,000 a year, and now he was cashing in that investment to force me into this wedding. "Avery, are you listening?" Candace snapped, pulling me back to the present. I said, "Graham prefers the blush ribbon, but I think the bashful tone pops more against the napkins. What do you think?" "I think Graham won't notice the difference unless you wrap it around his neck," I said. Candace narrowed her eyes. "You are being difficult, just like Dad said you would be. Can you just pretend to be happy for me? Graham is perfect. This wedding is perfect." She said it with a manic intensity, as if saying it enough times would make it true. I hadn't met Graham clean until dinner that evening. He was waiting for us in the formal dining room, nursing a scotch that looked older than I was. On paper, Graham was the ideal match for Candace. He was 32, worked in venture capital, and possessed a jawline that could cut glass. But as I sat across from him, slicing into a piece of undercooked salmon, I felt a familiar prickle on the back of my neck. He was too smooth. Not charming smooth, but salesman smooth. "So Avery," Graham said, his eyes scanning me but not really seeing me, "Dean tells me you are studying sociology. Interesting choice. What is the projected ROI on a degree like that these days?" "It is not really about the return on investment," I said, taking a sip of water. "It is about understanding human behavior right." Graham chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Well, someone has to understand it. I prefer to monetize it. Candace tells me you will be handling the guest coordination this week. Excellent. We need to make sure the investors, the guests, are comfortable. There is a lot of potential capital in that room on Saturday." He had corrected himself, but not fast enough. "Investors." I looked at Dean at the head of the table. He was beaming. He didn't look like a father watching his daughter marry for love. He looked like a CEO closing a merger. The conversation didn't flow like family banter. It felt like a due diligence meeting. They talked about property values, market trends, and the optics of the reception. They didn't talk about the couple. They didn't talk about the future in terms of children or happiness, but in terms of acquisitions and mergers. I excused myself early, claiming a headache. The air in the dining room was too thin, sucked dry by the vacuum of their ambition. I walked out the back door into the garden. The cool night air was a relief. I needed to think. Something was wrong. The house looked perfect. The wedding was shaping up to be a 6F Figurura event, but the underlying frequency was off. It was like a movie set where the front of the building is elaborate, but if you open the door, there is nothing behind it but plywood and sandbags. "Avery, is that you?" I turned to see Mrs. Higgins standing at the hedge that separated our property from hers. She had lived next door for 20 years, a sweet woman who spent her days gardening and watching the neighborhood like a hawk. "Hi, Mrs. Higgins," I said, walking over to the fence. "I didn't know you were still up." "Oh, just deadheading the roses," she whispered, leaning in closer. She looked toward the house, then back at me. "It is good to see you, dear. We were worried you wouldn't make it with everything going on." "Everything going on?" I'd asked. Mrs. Higgins hesitated. She adjusted her gardening gloves. "Well, you know, the downsizing. I was so sad to see the baby grand piano go last week. I used to love hearing your mother play it, and the movers taking those lovely antique armoires yesterday. I assumed Dean was clearing out to sell the house. My stomach turned over. The piano is gone. Oh, yes, she said. And the boat. Saw them towing that away a month ago. But then, looking at this tent, she gestured to the massive structure on the lawn. I suppose he is just making room for the party. Still seems ashamed to sell your mother's things. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The piano was my mother's most prized possession. Dean had sworn never to sell it. It wasn't just furniture. It was a memory. If he had sold it along with the boat and the antiques. It wasn't to make room. You don't sell assets to make room for a party. You sell assets because you need cash fast. I thanked Mrs. Higgins and walked back toward the house, my mind racing. Dean was projecting wealth, flying in guests, threatening to cut my tuition, hosting a gala while simultaneously pawning the furniture. It was a shell game. He was moving money around to create the illusion of solvency. This wedding wasn't just a social event. It was a lifeline. Graham wasn't just a groom. He was a bailout. I entered through the side door near the mudroom. On the hallway table, a stack of mail had accumulated. Dean usually had a housekeeper sorted, but in the chaos of the wedding prep, it had been left in a pile. I flipped through it idly, not expecting to find anything, just needing something to do with my hands. Utility bill, wedding RSVP, magazine, invitation. Then I stopped. Halfway down the stack was a plain white envelope. The return address was a major national bank, but it wasn't addressed to Dean Alexander. It was addressed to MS. Avery Alexander. I stared at it. I hadn't lived in this house for 3 years. All my official mail went to my apartment in Bryanston. My bank statements were paperless. I had never used this address for any financial correspondence since I was an undergraduate. I pulled the envelope out of the stack. I held it up to the light. I couldn't read the contents, but I could feel the thickness of the paper. It wasn't a promotional flyer. It was formal correspondence. Avery. I jumped. Dean was standing at the end of the hallway. He had emerged from his study, his tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked at me and then his eyes flicked down to the envelope in my hand. He didn't lunge for it. He didn't yell. He just smiled, a slow, predatory curving of his lips. Catching up on the fan mail, he asked, walking toward me. Why is the bank sending mail to me here? I asked, keeping my voice steady. I don't have accounts with them. Dean reached out and gently took the envelope from my fingers. I let him take it. I knew if I fought him for it now, I would show my hand. Junk mail, sweetheart, he said, tossing it onto the table without looking at it. They buy lists. Since you are staying here this week, the algorithms probably picked up on it. Big data is terrifying, isn't it? He was lying. I knew he was lying. Bank algorithms don't generate physical mail to an address I haven't used in 3 years just because I walked in the door 6 hours ago. Dean stepped closer, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive scotch and desperation. He put a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy. Listen, he said, his voice dropping to that confidential whisper he used when he wanted to make you feel special before he crushed you. I know I came down hard on you about the tuition. I know things have been strained between us since your mother passed, but this week is important. If this wedding goes well, if everything goes according to plan with Graham, things are going to change for the better. He squeezed my shoulder. I want us to be a family again. Avery, a real team. Once we get through this week, once we get the paperwork sorted, I think we can wipe the slate clean. I could even look into increasing your stipend, maybe get you a better apartment for your final year. You would like that, wouldn't you? It was the carrot after the stick of the ultimatum. Here was the promise of a reward. He was offering to buy my affection, or at least my compliance. I would like that, I said. Good, Dean said. Then we are on the same page. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is a big day. He patted my cheek, a gesture that felt more like a slap, in slow motion, and walked up the stairs. I waited until I heard his bedroom door click shut. Then I looked back at the pile of mail. He had taken the letter, but I had seen the logo. I had seen the urgency of the red stamp on the corner. Dean was selling the furniture. He was desperate for this wedding to happen, and somehow my name was on a bank letter sent to his house. He wasn't trying to wipe the slate clean. He was trying to use me to clean up his mess. I went to my room, the guest room, because my old room had been turned into a staging area for the bridesmaids' gifts, and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my reflection in the dark window. The scared girl, who had turned down a scholarship to please her father, was gone. She had died the moment he threatened her education. The woman sitting here now was done being a prop. I pulled out my phone. I didn't cry. I didn't call a friend to vent. I opened the browser and typed in the name of the bank from the envelope. I wasn't going to rely on my intuition. I wasn't going to rely on Dean's promises. I was going to rely on evidence. If Dean Alexander wanted a war, he had made a critical error. He thought he was fighting a child who feared him. He didn't realize he was fighting a student who knew how to research. I would find out what was in that envelope. I would find out why the piano was gone. And I would find out exactly what Graham Klein was investing in. The house was quiet, but the silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like the holding of breath before a scream. I lay down, clutching my phone like a weapon. Let the games begin. Wednesday morning began with the deceptively cheerful chirp of a robin outside the window, and the hold music of Bryanston University's financial aid office buzzing in my ear. I had locked myself in the guest bathroom again, the water running in the sink to create a wall of white noise. Dean had claimed he would cut off my tuition next week if I didn't comply, but the letter from the bank and the missing furniture had planted a seed of suspicion that was rapidly growing into a forest of paranoia. I needed to know the baseline. I needed to know if he even had the money to cut off Bryanston Student Services. "This is Linder," a weary voice finally answered. "Hi, Linder. This is Avery Alexander, student ID number 19,045,521. I am calling to verify the status of my tuition payment for the upcoming fall semester. My father usually handles the wire transfer by this date." There was the sound of typing, rhythmic and slow. I stared at the grout lines between the tiles, counting them to keep my heart rate down. "Okay, MS. Alexander," Linder said, "I'm looking at your ledger. It looks like the fall semester balance is currently outstanding. The total is $28,400. My stomach tightened. "Outstanding. You mean he hasn't paid it?" "Correct. There is no payment on file for this term." However, Linder paused, and I heard the click of a mouse. "I see a note here regarding a pending disbursement. It looks like the financial aid office received a new FAFSA application and a request for a private loan certification last month." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" "A loan application. Yes, a private loan through Vidian Educational Trust. It is pending certification. The paperwork was submitted electronically regarding the balance." I gripped the phone so hard my fingers itched. "Linder, I didn't apply for a loan. My father pays my tuition directly. I have never taken out financial aid." "Oh," Linder said, her voice shifting from bureaucratic to concerned. "Well, the application was submitted under your Social Security number on May 15th. It lists your home address," as she read off the address of the estate. "Dean's address." "I see," I said, forcing my voice to remain calm despite the bile rising in my throat. "Thank you, Linder. Please do not certify that loan. Put a hold on my account. I need to sort this out." I hung up and immediately sank onto the closed toilet lid. May 15th. That was 4 weeks ago. Around the same time Mrs. Higgins said the boat was towed away. Dean hadn't threatened to cut my tuition because he was trying to control me. He was threatening to cut it because he couldn't pay it. He was broke, or at least cash poor enough that he was resorting to taking out loans in my name to keep up the charade of the benevolent benefactor. I needed to see the full picture. I opened the laptop I had hidden under a stack of towels. I navigated to a credit reporting site. I had never felt the need to check my credit score religiously. I had no debt, no credit cards other than a small emergency one I barely used. I assumed my score was pristine. I typed in my Social Security number, date of birth, and answered the security questions. The wheels spun on the screen for 10 seconds. 10 seconds that felt like 10 years. Then the number popped up, 620. I stared at the screen. 620 was not the score of a person with no debt. It was the score of someone who was over-leveraged. I clicked on the Open Accounts tab. My eyes scanned the list and the air left my loans. There was my small emergency credit card, and below it there were 3 other lines of credit opened in the last 6 months. 2 credit cards maxed out to limits of $5,000 each and a personal loan for $15,000 originating from a bank I had never walked into. The billing address for all of them was the estate. Dean wasn't just controlling me. He was cannibalizing me. He had stolen my identity, used my good credit history, which he knew was clean because he had controlled my finances for years to secure cash for himself. The tuition he was holding over my head was likely going to be paid by a loan that I would be responsible for paying back. He was making me pay for my own leash. I felt a surge of nausea, followed instantly by a cold, sharp clarity. This was a crime. If anyone else had done this, I would have called the police immediately. But this was Dean Alexander. He knew the system. He knew I was graduating in a year. He was banking on the fact that I wouldn't report him because I feared the scandal would blow back on me, or that I simply wouldn't figure it out until the wedding was over, and he had fixed it with Graham's money. I took screenshots of everything, the loan dates, the amounts, the inquiries. I saved them to a hidden folder on my hard drive and then uploaded them to a secure cloud storage account that wasn't linked to my family email. Then I went to work on the security. I changed every password I owned, email, banking, school portal. I set up 2-factor authentication for everything, linking it to an authenticator app on my phone so that even if Dean had access to my old text messages, he couldn't get in. I was just finishing the digital lockdown when someone hammered on the bathroom door. "Avery, my God, are you dying in there?" It was Candace. I closed the laptop, shoved it into my tote bag, and flushed the toilet for effect. I'd opened the door to find my sister standing there, holding a garment bag and looking like she was about to scream. "I have been looking for you for 20 minutes, she hissed. "The bridesmaids' dresses arrived, and the seamstress needs the final payment before she will release them for the steaming, and the hotel for the hair and makeup team needs a credit card on file for incidentals." She shoved an invoice toward my chest. I instinctively took it. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. "Because Dad is in a meeting with the caterers and I can't interrupt him," Candace said, rolling her eyes. "Just put it on your card for now. Dad will reimburse you after the weekend. It is only $800 for the release fee and another $500 for the room deposit." I looked at the invoice. $1,300. "I don't have $1,300, Candace," I said flatly. "I am a graduate student," Candace scoffed, a sound of pure unadulterated entitlement. "Oh, please. Dad deposits your allowance every month. Don't be stingy. This is my wedding week. Do you want me to walk down the aisle in a wrinkled dress because you are being cheap?" "It is not about being cheap," I said, my voice rising slightly. "It is about the fact that I literally do not have the funds. And why isn't Graham paying for this, or the investors?" Candace's face flushed. "Graham is handling the big stuff, the venue, the band. The small stuff is on us. That is tradition." "Avery, God, you are so ungrateful. You are staying here for free, eating our food, and you can't even float a deposit for 48 hours. Ungrateful." I repeated the word. It tasted like ash. "I am here because Dad threatened to cut off my future if I didn't come." "That is not hospitality, Candace. That is a hostage situation." "You are so dramatic." She spat. "Fine. If you are going to be useless, go find Dad. He said he needed to see you anyway. Something about paperwork. Maybe if you sign whatever he wants, he will give you the money to pay the seamstress." She snatched the invoice back from my hand and stormed off, her heels punishing the hardwood floor. I stood there watching her go. She didn't know. I could see it in her eyes. She genuinely thought Dean was flush with cash and that I was just being difficult. She was as much a victim of his gaslighting as I was. Only she was being fed with sugar while I was being fed with vinegar. "Avery." I turned. Dean was standing in the doorway of his study, phone in hand. He looked stressed. The mask of the confident patriarch was slipping at the edges. There was sweat on his brow. I heard shouting. He said, Candace wants money for the dresses. I said, I told her I couldn't cover it. Dean waved his hand dismissively. I will handle Candace. Come in here for a second. I walked into the study. It was a room that smelled of leather and old decisions. The desk was covered in stacks of paper, far more disorganized than usual. I need to get this out of the way so I can focus on the rehearsal dinner, Dean said, moving behind the desk. He didn't sit. He shuffled through a pile of documents. The lawyer sent over the updated trust structure. Since you are 27 now, we need to update the beneficiary clauses and the liability waivers for the estate. Standard procedure to protect the assets from taxes. He pulled out a thick document clipped together at the top. He flipped to the last page where a yellow sign here flag was stuck. Just sign there, he said, handing me a heavy fountain pen. And then we can talk about your tuition for next year. I was thinking since you are doing well, maybe I cover your living expenses for the summer, too. A little graduation bonus. He was bribing me. He was bribing me to sign a document I hadn't read. I need to read it first. Dad, I said, not taking the pen. Dean let out a sharp, frustrated sigh. Avery, it is 40 pages of legalese. It says that if I die, you get money. And if someone sues us during the wedding, you aren't liable. That is it. We don't have time for a reading circle. The courier is coming in an hour. I am not citing anything I haven't read, I said, planting my feet. That is what you taught me, isn't it? Never sign a contract without reviewing the terms. Dean's door tightened. For a second, I thought he was going to snap, but then he forced a smile. It was a terrifying, tight expression. Fine, he said. Read it, but do it quickly. I need it signed by lunch. He turned to answer his ringing phone. Turning his back to me, I looked down at the desk. The document he wanted me to sign was sitting there, but my eyes were drawn to a different pile of papers, slightly pushed to the side under a leather portfolio. There was a large manila envelope with the logo of a law firm, Hawthorne Lyle. It wasn't the firm the family had used for years. This was a firm known for corporate bankruptcy and high-risk lending. I knew the name because they had recruited on campus last year. Sticking out of the envelope was a post-it note in handwriting that wasn't Dean's. It was jagged, hasty scroll terms contingent on cosigner with clear academic employment prospects. Need a signature on guarantee agreement by Friday or the bridge loan defaults. At Avery Alexander, my heart stopped. This wasn't about a trust. This wasn't about protecting assets. Dean was trying to secure a bridge loan, a high-interest, desperate loan used to plug a massive financial hole, and his credit was shot. He couldn't get it on his own. He needed a cosigner, but he didn't need just any cosigner. He needed someone with clear academic employment prospects, someone with a clean record, someone young with a lifetime of earning potential ahead of them. He wanted me to co-sign a loan that would likely bankrupt me before my career even began. He was going to leverage my future earnings to pay for this wedding, for his debts, for the facade of his life. I looked at the document he had presented to me. It was titled Family Trust Amendment. It was a decoy. The real document, the guarantee agreement mentioned on the post-it, was somewhere else, likely waiting to be slipped under my pen the moment I let my guard down, or perhaps tucked inside this very stack, hidden between pages of nonsense. Avery, Dean said, hanging up the phone and turning back. Are you reading or staring? Just thinking, I said. I picked up the trust amendment. I will take this to my room to read. It is too noisy down here with Candace screaming. Dean hesitated. He looked at the document in my hand, then at the clock. Fine. 1 hour, Avery. Do not test my patience today. I won't, I said. I walked out of the study, clutching the papers. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. They were trembling with rage. The tuition threat was a hook. The wedding was the stage, but the signature was the trap. I walked up the stairs, past the portraits of my ancestors who looked down with disapproval. I went into my room and locked the door. I threw the trust amendment on the bed. I didn't care about it. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't just going to read the papers. I was going to find the real document, and I was going to burn this entire scheme to the ground. But first, I needed to make sure that when the explosion happened, I wasn't the one standing in the blast zone. I took out my phone and dialed the number for the Bryanston Legal Aid Clinic. It was a long shot, but I needed allies. "Hello," I whispered when the line connected. "My name is Avery Alexander. I believe I am the victim of identity theft and coercion involving a family member, and I need to know how to record a conversation legally in this state." The welcome party was held on the sprawling back lawn underneath a marquee tent that likely cost more than my entire undergraduate education. Strings of Edison bulbs cast a warm golden glow over the scene designed to make everyone look rich, happy, and carefree. It was a masterclass in illusion. I arrived 20 minutes late, having spent that time staring at the ceiling of my bedroom, practicing my breathing. When I finally stepped onto the grass, the air was thick with the scent of roasted lamb and expensive perfume. A jazz quartet was playing something inoffensive in the corner. As I navigated the crowd, I felt the eyes of my relatives landing on me. These were aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't seen in 2 or 3 years. Their gazes didn't hold warmth. They held a mixture of pity and judgment. "There she is," I heard my Aunt Carol whisper to her husband, not bothering to lower her voice. "Dean says she is still in school, nearly 30, and still living off her father. Such a shame compared to Candace." I kept my chin up, forcing a tight smile as I grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. "Avery." Candace's voice cut through the jazz. She was standing near the center of the tent, wearing a white cocktail dress that shimmered under the lights. She was holding court with a group of women who looked like they had all been manufactured in the same high-end factory. I walked over, the gravel crunching under my heels. "Hi, Candace," I said. "You look beautiful." "Finally," she said, rolling her eyes playfully, though the dig was sharp. She turned to her friends. "Everyone, this is my little sister, Avery. She just flew in from university. She's working on her, what is it again? Another degree. Sociology," I said. "I am finishing my master's." "Right." Candace laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "She is the eternal student. Daddy is so patient with her, supporting her through all of it. I told her she needs to get a real job soon. Ordinate is going to go broke just paying for her textbooks." The group laughed. It was a polite, cruel laughter. Candace had framed the narrative perfectly. I was the leech, the burden, the failure who couldn't launch. Dean was the benevolent saint. It was a brilliant preemptive strike. If I complained about anything later, these people would just see it as the ingratitude of a spoiled child. "Well, it is nice that your father can afford to keep you comfortable," one of the women said, looking me up and down with disdain. "Actually," I started, ready to defend myself, to mention my teaching assistant job, my grants. "Avery, be a dear and hold this." Candace interrupted, thrusting her empty champagne flute into my hand. "And check with the planner about the cake arrival time. You are here to help, remember." She turned her back on me, dismissing me like staff. I stood there holding her dirty glass, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. I wanted to smash the glass on the ground, but I remembered the loan application. I remembered the pending signature. If I caused a scene now, Dean would have the excuse he needed to isolate me. I turned to find a waiter to take the glass, but instead I found Graham. The groom was standing just outside the circle of light, watching me. He was wearing a navy suit that fit him like a second skin. He stepped forward, a smile plastered on his face that didn't reach his eyes. "Avery," he said. He extended a hand. I took it. His grip was firm, too firm. He didn't shake my hand. He held it, his fingers pressing into my palm as if he were testing the bone structure. He didn't let go when the social window for a handshake had closed. "Graham," I said, pulling my hand back slightly. He held on for another second before releasing me. "I am glad you made it," he said. His voice was smooth, like polished stone. "Dean was worried you might be too busy with your studies. It is important to keep those grades up. High achievement correlates with high creditworthiness. Isn't that right?" I froze. It was an odd thing to say at a wedding party. "I suppose," I said cautiously. "I focus more on the academic value than the credit score." "Pity," Graham said, taking a sip of his drink. "In the real world, Avery, your credit is your character. Dean tells me you have a very clean record. No debts, no bad decisions. That is a rare asset these days. What are your plans after graduation? Big firm corporate consulting. He was betting me. I could feel it. He wasn't asking out of polite interest. He was appraising me like a racehorse. He wanted to know if I had the earning potential to service the debt they were planning to dump on me. I have a few offers. I lied. Corporate research. High starting salary. Graham's eyes lit up. Excellent. That is very reassuring. It is good to know the family has strong financial pillars besides Dean. We all need to pitch in to keep the legacy alive, don't we? He patted my shoulder, a heavy, possessive gesture. Make sure you enjoy the party. We paid a premium for the open bar. He walked away, sliding into the crowd like a shark entering a school of fish. I moved to the edge of the tent, trying to get some fresh air. That was when I noticed the guests. Usually a wedding guest list is a mix of family, friends, college roommates, and neighbors. I scanned the room. I saw Mrs. Higgins looking uncomfortable in the corner. I saw a few of our cousins, but at least half the people in the tent were strangers. Men in expensive but ill-fitting suits, huddled in groups, talking intensely, women who looked bored checking their phones. These weren't friends. They were business associates. Enjoying yourself. Dean appeared at my elbow. He was holding a glass of scotch, playing the role of the patriarch perfectly. He smiled at the passing guests, waving to a man across the room, but his words to me were laced with venom. I am trying, Dad, I said. Try harder, he murmured, his smile never wavering. You looked sour when Candace introduced you. Fix your face and be nice to Mr. Sterling over there. He is the one with the red tie. He is very important to your sister's future. Is he a friend of Graham's? I asked. He is a partner, Dean said. This whole wedding, it is a networking opportunity, Avery. Don't squander it. And don't forget our little meeting tomorrow morning. I want those papers signed before the rehearsal. He leaned in close, the smell of alcohol sharp on his breath. Be a good girl, and your tuition check will be in the mail on Monday. Be difficult, and you can walk back to Bryanston. He clapped me on the back hard enough to make me stumble a step, and then moved on to greet Mr. Sterling with a booming laugh. I spent the next 2 hours in a state of high-functioning dissociation. I fetched Candace's lipstick. I ran to the main house to get her backup shoes. I apologized to the caterer for a mistake Candace had made with the menu. I'd played the part. At one point, I found Candace alone near the buffet, looking pale. She was staring at a platter of oysters. Are you okay? I asked despite myself. She jumped. I am fine, just tired. There are so many people. Who are they? Candace, I asked softly. Half these people look like bankers. They're sponsors, she said, her voice trembling slightly. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Graham said we could get the venue and the catering at a discount if we allowed some of his potential investors to attend. It is a trade-off. It is smart business. Since when is a wedding a business transaction? I asked since always. Avery, she snapped, her fragility hardening back into defensiveness. Grow up. Not everyone gets a free ride like you. Some of us have to hustle. She stormed off, but I had seen the fear in her eyes. She wasn't happy. She was terrified. She knew this wasn't normal, but she was too deep in the delusion to pull the ripcord. By 11:00, the party was winding down. I helped the staff clear some of the tables, unpaid of course, and then headed back to the house. The main house was quiet. I assumed everyone had gone to bed. I walked down the hallway toward the kitchen to get a glass of water, my footsteps silent on the rugs. As I passed the study, I heard voices. The door was cracked open about an inch. She is hesitant. It was Dean's voice, low, agitated. She doesn't need to be enthusiastic, Dean. She just needs to be legally binding. That was Graham. His voice was cold, stripped of the charm he used in public. I stopped, holding my breath. I pressed myself against the wall, listening. I gave her the trust amendment today as a soft opener. Dean said, I will slip the guarantee in tomorrow, but are you sure the bank will accept it? She is a student. She has a 780 credit score, Graham said. He had checked. He had actually checked, and she has no debt load. With her co-signing, The risk algorithm drops enough to approve the bridge loan. That gives us $2 million, enough to cover the wedding debts, pay off your outstanding liens, and float my firm for another 6 months until the IPO the IPO launch. He had almost slipped. Spam, and if we default? Dean asked. There was a tremor of fear in his voice. We won't, Graham said dismissively. But if we do, the bank goes after the guarantor first. They will garnish her wages for the next 20 years. You and I will be insulated. What about Candace? Dean asked. Does she know? Candace thinks I'm a genius. Graham scoffed. Don't let her know the sister is the one actually paying for the champagne. Candace is fragile. She likes the lifestyle, not the math. Keep her happy. Keep the sister compliant. Sign the papers tomorrow and we are clear. Friday, Dean said. I will get her to sign on Friday morning. The pressure will be higher. She won't have time to read it. Friday then, Graham said. But don't screw this up, Dean. I need that capital. I heard the sound of glass clinking. They were toasting to the destruction of my life. I backed away slowly, step by step, until I was far enough down the hall to turn and sprint silently up the stairs to my room. I locked the door and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They were going to ruin me. It wasn't just a loan. It was $2 million. They were going to hang a $2 million noose around my neck so they could live in luxury while I spent the rest of my life in servitude to a bank. And Dean, my own father, he had agreed to it. He had asked what if we default, and accepted the answer that I would be the one to burr. I looked at the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide. I could leave. I could pack my bag right now, climb out the window, and drive away. I could save myself. But if I left, they would find another way. They would forge my signature, or they would manipulate Candace into signing something that would destroy her, too. And despite everything, despite her cruelty today, she was being played just as hard as I was. I took a deep breath. No, I wasn't leaving. They wanted a compliant daughter. They wanted a naive, grateful girl who would sign whatever Daddy put in front of her because she was scared of losing her tuition. Fine, I would give them exactly that. I walked over to my suitcase and pulled out the trust amendment Dean had given me. I tossed it on the floor. Tomorrow I would wake up early. I would make coffee for Dean. I would apologize to Candace. I would tell Graham how impressed I was with his business acumen. I would lower my shields. I would make them think they had won because if they thought I was defeated, they would get sloppy. They would leave the real papers out. They would stop whispering. And when they handed me the pen on Friday morning, I wouldn't be signing my life away. I would be signing their death warrant. I climbed into bed, pulling the expensive duvet up to my chin. I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, plotting. The scared student was gone. The victim was gone. The girl who woke up the next morning would be the best actress this family had ever seen. Thursday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. The air was heavy with humidity, the kind that sticks your shirt to your back the moment you step outside. It was fitting weather for what I was about to do. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation I had overheard between Dean and Graham. $2 million, a bridge loan, my financial execution. I showered and dressed in a soft beige sweater and jeans, unthreatening, domestic, the uniform of the obedient daughter. I went downstairs to the kitchen. The house staff was already bustling, preparing for the influx of relatives who would be arriving for the rehearsal lunch. I brewed a pot of coffee, Dean's preferred dark roast. I placed a cup on a tray along with a croissant and carried it toward his study. I paused at the door, taking a deep breath to steady my pulse. This was a performance. If I overacted, he would catch me. If I underacted, he would remain suspicious. I needed to hit the perfect note of contrite submission. I knocked softly. Come in, Dean's voice barked. I pushed the door open. He was behind his desk, surrounded by chaos. Papers were everywhere. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red-rimmed, and there was a tightness around his mouth that I hadn't seen in years. Coffee, I said, setting the tray down on the corner of his desk. I thought you might need it. Dean looked up, surprised. He studied my face, searching for the defiance I had shown yesterday. I gave him nothing but a tired, apologetic smile. Thanks, he grunted. reaching for the cup. "I didn't expect you up this early." "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. "I was thinking about what you said about the tuition and about us being a team." Dean took a sip of the coffee, his shoulders relaxing by a fraction of an inch. "And then you are right," I said. The light tasted like copper in my mouth. "I have been difficult. I know how much stress you are under with the wedding. I don't want to add to it. If signing those papers helps the family, then I want to help." Dean set the cup down. A slow smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a fisherman who feels the line go taut. "I knew you would come around, Avery," he said, his voice dripping with paternal condescension. "You are a smart girl. You know which side your bread is buttered on." But I added, keeping my voice small, "I am still nervous about the legal language. You know how I get. I just need to read through it properly so I don't panic when the notary is staring at me. Can I just sit here and look at the draft for 20 minutes just to get comfortable with it?" Dean hesitated. His eyes darted to the locked drawer on his right. Then he looked at the clock. "I have a walk-through with the tent vendor in 5 minutes," he said. He drummed his fingers on the desk. He was weighing the risk. He decided that my submission was genuine enough. "Fine, but don't mess up my filing system. The documents are in the blue folder on the credenza. Read them, but do not take them out of this room." "I promise," I said. He stood up, adjusted his jacket, and walked to the door. "I will be back in 30 minutes. Have it read by then. We will sign tomorrow morning." The moment the door clicked shut, I moved. I didn't go to the credenza. I went straight to the locked drawer he had looked at. I knew Dean. He never put the important things where he told people to look. The blue folder likely contained the harmless trust amendment he had shown me yesterday. The real weapon would be close to him. The drawer was locked. I scanned the desk. Dean had a habit of keeping the key under his desk bladder. I lifted the heavy leather corner. There it was, a small brass key. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to be steady. I unlocked the drawer and pulled it open. Inside, sitting on top of a stack of old checkbooks, was a thick document bound with a heavy clip. The cover page read, "Vidian Capital Secured Bridge Facility Agreement." I flipped it open. This was not a trust amendment. I pulled out my phone. I silenced the shutter sound. I began to photograph every single page. Page 1, Borrower, Dean Alexander and Graham Clean via Shell Entity JK Holdings. Page 5, Principal Amount $2 million. Page 12, Interest Rate 9% per annum, jumping to 18% upon default. And then I found the page that made my blood run cold. Page 30, Unconditional Personal Guarantee. The text was brutal in its clarity. The guarantor, hereby identified as Avery Alexander, agrees to be jointly and severally liable for the full principal and interest. The guarantor waives all rights to notice of default. The guarantor acknowledges that this liability is absolute and binding regardless of the solvency of the primary borrower. There was a line for my signature. Someone had already penciled in AAA in small letters where I was supposed to sign. It was worse than I thought. This wasn't just co-signing. This was an unconditional guarantee. It meant that if Dean and Graham missed a single payment, the bank wouldn't even bother suing them first. They could come directly after me. They could garnish my future wages, seize any assets I acquired, and destroy my credit for decades. I kept flipping. I found an addendum. Collateral future earnings and assets of the guarantor. They were literally mortgaging my future career. I heard the front door open downstairs. Dean's voice boomed in the hallway. "The tent is too small. Move it back 10 ft." He was back early. I shoved the document back into the drawer. I locked it. I slid the key back under the blotter. I moved to the credenza and grabbed the blue folder he had pointed to the decoy folder. I sat in the leather armchair just as the study door opened. Dean walked in, looking flushed and angry. He stopped when he saw me sitting calmly in the chair, reading the blue folder. "Everything okay?" he asked, eyeing me suspiciously. "Yes," I said, closing the folder. "It is dense, but I think I understand it. It is just standard asset protection, right?" "Exactly," Dean said, exhaling a breath. He seemed to have been holding just standard stuff. "You ready to sign tomorrow?" "I will be ready," I said. I just need to run to the pharmacy for Candace. She needs more setting spray. Go, Dean said, waving me away. He sat down at his desk, right over the drawer where the gun aimed at my head was hidden. I walked out of the study, my legs feeling like jelly. I didn't go to the pharmacy. I went to my car, parked down the driveway out of sight of the house windows. I locked the doors and pulled up the photos I had taken. I sent them via an encrypted messaging app to Sarah, a friend from law school who was working at the legal aid clinic I had called yesterday. Please look at these. Is it as bad as I think it is? I waited 1 minute, 2 minutes. My phone pinged. Sarah Avery, where did you get this? This is nuclear. This is a predatory lending agreement. Joint and several means they can bypass the borrower and come straight for you. And look at Clause 14b. It waives your right to sue for fraud. If you sign this, you are on the hook for $2 million plus interest. Do not sign this. Do not even be in the same room as this paper. I leaned my head back against the headrest. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. They were trying to kill me, not physically, but socially and financially. I needed to secure my escape route. I dialed the Brierstone financial aid office again. I asked to speak to the director using the name of a professor who liked me as a reference to get through the gatekeepers. MS. Alexander, the director said after I explained my situation, omitting the fraud but stating that my family funding had been abruptly cut off. We have an emergency retention protocol. Since you are in your final year and have a 4.0 GPA, we can offer you a mix of departmental grants and federal unsubsidized loans. It won't cover everything. You will have to work part-time, but it will cover tuition and housing. So I can graduate? I asked, my voice cracking. Without my father's check? Yes, the director said. We can finalize the paperwork electronically. You just need to accept the award package on your portal. Do it, I said. Please do it now. I hung up. Tears pricked my eyes. I was poor. I would be in debt for student loans, but it was my debt. It was $30,000, not $2 million, and it was freedom. I wiped my face and drove back to the house. I had to keep playing the game. I had to wait for the right moment to drop the hammer. I found Candace in the bridal suite. She was sitting on the floor surrounded by tissue paper looking at a pair of diamond earrings. Dean gave them to me, she said softly as I entered, for the rehearsal dinner. They are beautiful, I said. Candace looked up. Her eyes were rimmed with red. She looked exhausted. He is so stressed. Avery, she said. I heard him yelling at the bank on the phone this morning. He keeps saying he just needs to get through this week. Once the wedding is over, once Graham's deal goes through, everything will be fine. We just have to be perfect until Sunday. She sounded like a child repeating a prayer she didn't understand. Candace, I said, sitting down across from her. Do you know what the deal is? The one Graham is working on. No, she said, shaking her head. I don't understand that stuff. Graham says it is better if I don't worry my pretty little head about it. She laughed, but it was a bitter, hollow sound. He says I just need to look good and sign where he tells me to. Sign? I asked. Have you signed anything? A few things, she shrugged. Loan applications, I think, but they got rejected. My ears perked up. Rejected? Why? I don't know, she said, tossing a piece of paper into the trash bin beside her. Something about my debt-to-income ratio. I guess maxing out those credit cards for the engagement party wasn't smart. Graham was furious. I looked at the trash bin. A crumbled piece of paper was sitting on top. I am going to get some water, I said. Do you want some? Sure, Candace said, turning back to the mirror. I stood up. As I walked past the trash bin, I pretended to stumble. Dropping my phone, I bent down to pick it up and in the same motion, I snatched the crumbled paper. I walked into the hallway and smoothed it out. It was an email printout from a mortgage broker to Graham. Subject C. Alexander application denied. Graham, we cannot proceed with Candace as the guarantor. Her credit utilization is at 90%, and she has 3 missed payments on her record from last year. The underwriters laughed at the application. If you want this bridge loan, you need a different signer, someone with a spotless history and no existing debt load. Do you have another sibling or a partner with a clean file? If not, the deal is dead by Friday. I stared at the paper. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. It wasn't that I was the favorite. It wasn't that Dean wanted me to be part of the family again. It wasn't even that they hated me. It was simply that Candace was used up. They had already drained her. They had used her credit until it was dry, leveraged her name until it was toxic to the banks. She was a squeezed lemon, and I was the fresh fruit. They had gone down the list of available victims. Candace was option A. She failed. I was option B. That was why the sudden demand for my presence. That was why the ultimatum. That was why Graham was asking about my credit score. They didn't want me at the wedding to celebrate. They needed a fresh body to throw into the financial grinder because the first one was already chewed up. I looked back at the door where Candace was admiring her diamond earrings. Earrings probably bought with the last few dollars of credit Dean could scrape together. She didn't know she was broke. She didn't know she was already ruined. And she was willing to let them ruin me too, just to keep the fantasy alive for one more weekend. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. My anger, which had been a hot, blazing fire all morning, suddenly cooled into something akin to ice. It was a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I had the photos of the fraudulent loan. I had the email proving they were targeting me because Candace was insolvent. I had the recording of their conspiracy. And now I had my own financing from the university. I was no longer a victim. I was a prosecutor building a case. Dean wanted me to sign on Friday. Fine. I would be there, but I wouldn't be bringing a pen. I would be bringing the truth. I walked back into the room with the water. Here you go, I said, handing the glass to Candace. Thanks, she said, smiling. You are being really sweet today, Avery. Maybe you have finally grown up. Maybe, I said, watching her sip the water. Or maybe I have just finally learned how to play the game. The trap was set, but they had forgotten one thing. When you trap a wolf, you better make sure the cage is strong enough, because if it gets out, it eats you. The digital footprint of Graham Klein was manicured, like a golf course, lush, green, and completely artificial. I sat in the cab of my car, parked halfway down the service road behind the estate, my phone tethered to my laptop. The house was too dangerous now. Every room felt like it had ears, and Dean's sudden bouts of checking in on me were becoming frequent. I had typed JK Holdings into every business registry I could access through the university library database. On the surface, it looked legitimate. There was a sleek website with stock photos of glass skyscrapers and diverse people shaking hands. But when I dug into the metadata, the facade crumbled. The domain had been registered only 6 months ago. The About Us page listed a headquarters in downtown Manhattan, but a cross-reference with the building's tenant list showed no such company. The suite number listed belonged to a mail forwarding service. Graham wasn't a venture capitalist. He was a ghost. I widened the search. I stopped looking for the company and started looking for the man. I searched for variations of his name combined with keywords like fraud, lawsuit, and bankruptcy. For 20 minutes, I got nothing. He had scrubbed his history well, but the internet never truly forgets. It just misplaces things. I found a cached version of a local business journal from a small town in Arizona, dated 3 years ago. The headline was buried on page 4. Contractors alleged non-payment at Desert Ridge Development. The article detailed a luxury condo project that had stalled after the lead developer vanished, leaving electricians and plumbers with thousands of dollars in unpaid invoices. The developer was listed as Gray Klein. There was no photo, but the methodology was identical. High promises, flashy presentation, and then a sudden disappearance when the bills came due. I needed physical confirmation. I closed the laptop and drove back up to the main house, parking near the catering trucks. The crew was setting up for the rehearsal dinner. I spotted the venue manager, a harried-looking woman named Brenda, who was arguing with a delivery driver. I waited until she was alone, then approached with a bottle of water I had grabbed from my car. You look like you need this, I said, handing it to her. Brenda took it gratefully. Honey, you have no idea. This heat is killing the floral arrangements, and the bride is demanding hydrangeas that don't wilt. It is physically impossible. My sister can be demanding, I admitted. I hope my dad and Graham are treating you well, at least on the business side. Brenda hesitated. She took a long drink of water, her eyes darting toward the main house. Mr. Alexander is fine, a bit intense, but the groom. She lowered her voice. Can I ask you something? Is it normal for your family to settle accounts post-event? My pulse quickened. What do you mean? Usually, for a ticket of this size, we are talking $50,000 for the catering alone. We require full payment 48 hours before service, Brenda explained. Mr. Klein pulled me aside yesterday. He gave me this charming speech about liquidity and asset transfers. He asked to pay the balance next week after the honeymoon. He offered a 10% bonus if we let it slide. And did you? I asked. My boss authorized it because the Alexander name is good in this town, Brenda said, looking worried. But between you and me, it made my stomach hurt. People who have money usually just write the check. They don't make speeches. If I were you, I said quietly, I would get that check the minute the cake is cut. Don't wait for next week. Brenda's face palled. She nodded, understanding the code. I walked away, my stomach churning. Graham wasn't just broke. He was insolvent. He was floating this entire wedding on the reputation of a family that was also secretly broke. It was a house of cards built inside a house of cards. I went back to my room and locked the door. I had enough to confront Dean, but I needed the final nail in the coffin. I needed to know who Graham was. I went back to social media. Graham's Instagram was private, but I had found a way around that yesterday by creating a burner account and following the hashtags of weddings he had attended. I scrolled back 2 years, 3 years. I found a picture tagged at a vineyard in Narper. It wasn't on Graham's profile, but on the profile of a winery. In the background of a shot of a wine tasting, there was a man who was unmistakably Graham. He was laughing, his arm draped possessively around a woman with dark hair. She was wearing a massive diamond ring. The caption read, "Congratulations to our contest winners, Graham and Meyer, celebrating their engagement in style." The date was 18 months ago. According to Candace, she and Graham had met 2 years ago in New York. The timelines overlapped. He was engaged to this Meyer woman while he was courting my sister. I tacked on the photo. I found the winery's tagged users. There was no tag for Graham, but there was one for the woman, Meyer in the city. Her profile was public. I scrolled. It was a feed of a happy, affluent life that suddenly went dark 18 months ago. No photos for 6 months. Then a post about starting over and healing from betrayal. There were no photos of Graham left on her feed. She had purged him. I took a risk. I sent her a direct message from my real account. Hi, Meyer. You don't know me, but I think you knew Graham clean. He is marrying my sister on Saturday. I found your photo from the vineyard. Something feels wrong here. If you have any information, please help me. I didn't expect a reply. I threw the phone on the bed and paced the room. 10 minutes passed, then 20. My phone buzzed. I lunged for it. Meyer in the city, call me now. She sent a number. I dialed immediately. Hello. The voice on the other end was sharp, guarded. Meyer, this is Avery. Are you the sister? Meyer asked. She sounded breathless, like she had been running. Yes, I am the sister. Listen to me carefully, Meyer said. Her voice dropped to a fierce whisper. Get your family away from him. Don't let him sign anything. Don't let him near your bank accounts. What did he do to you? I asked. He didn't just break my heart, Meyer said. He bankrupted my father. Graham isn't rich. He targets women from families that have assets, real estate, old money, but who aren't paying attention to the details. He proposed to me after 3 months. He was charming. He said he wanted to merge our portfolios to build an empire together. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was the exact same script. He convinced my dad to co-sign a business loan for a sure-thing development project. Meyer continued, her voice trembling with rage. He said it was just a formality to get a better interest rate. The day the funds cleared, Graham vanished. He transferred the money to offshore accounts and left us with the debt. My dad had to sell his practice. We lost the house. He is trying to get me to sign a guarantee. I whisper for $2 million. Do not sign it." Meyer screamed. "That is his exit strategy. He uses the wedding as the pressure cooker. He knows you won't read the fine print when you are rushing to the altar. Once he has the loan secured, he will leave your sister at the reception if he has you. He doesn't want a wife. He wants a line of credit." "Thank you, Meyer," I said. "I believe you." "Run," she said, "and tell your sister I'm sorry." I hung up. The room felt freezing cold despite the humidity outside. It wasn't just a bad business deal. Graham was a predator. He was a professional parasite who moved from host to host, sucking them dry before detaching. I had to tell Dean. I knew Dean was selfish. I knew he was controlling. But surely he wouldn't knowingly hand his daughter over to a man who had destroyed another family. Dean was obsessed with the Alexander legacy. A scandal like this, a groom running off with millions, would humiliate him. Dean might be broke, but he was proud. He wouldn't let himself be played. I grabbed my phone and ran downstairs. I found Dean in the library. He was alone pouring a drink. It was only 3:00 in the afternoon. "Dad," I said, closing the door behind me. Dean turned, looking annoyed. "I thought you were helping Candace with the seating chart." "We need to talk," I said. "It is about Graham," Dean sighed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Avery, if this is about the ribbons again, I don't care." "It is not about ribbons," I said, walking closer. "I did some research. Graham's company, JK Holdings, it is a shell. And I found a woman who was engaged to him 18 months ago. She said he scammed her father out of a fortune. He takes out loans in the family's name and disappears." I watched Dean's face closely. I expected shock. I expected anger. I expected him to demand to see the evidence. Instead, Dean didn't even blink. He took a slow sip of his drink. He set the glass down on a coaster. He looked at me with a flat, dead expression. "You have been busy," he said. "Dad, did you hear me?" I asked, my voice rising. "He is a con man. He is going to steal the loan money and run. We have to stop the wedding." Dean let out a short, mirthless laugh. "Stop the wedding? Do you have any idea how much this wedding costs? Do you have any idea how many people are watching? Who cares who is watching? If he is stealing from us," I cried. "He isn't stealing from me," Dean said. The emphasis on the word "me" hit me like a physical blow. He walked around the desk and leaned against it, crossing his arms. "I know about the Arizona project," Dean said calmly, "and I know about the girl in Narper. Graham was very upfront with me. He told me he had some messy business partners in the past. He told me he needed a fresh start." "He lied to you?" I argued. "He offered me a deal." Dean corrected. "Graham needs a clean name to secure capital. I need capital to save this house and my reputation. We made an arrangement. The loan you are going to sign, half goes to Graham, half stays with me. We pay off the debts. Graham marries Candace, and everyone looks successful. It is a business transaction." "Avery, grow up." I stared at him. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. "You know," I whispered, "you know he's a fraud, and you are letting him marry Candace." "Candace gets to be a wife," Dean said with a shrug. "She gets the wedding she wanted. Graham will stick around for a year or two. If it doesn't work out, they divorce. It happens all the time. But by then, the money is secured, and the Alexander name is safe, and the debt," I asked, my voice trembling. "The $2 million, who pays that?" Dean looked at me. For the first time, I saw the true depth of his rot. There was no fatherly affection in his eyes. There was only the cold calculation of a man who would burn his own children to keep himself warm. "The business will pay it," Dean said vaguely. "Or, well, that is why we need a guarantor, someone young, someone with time to recover if the market turns." He smiled. It was the smile of a monster. "You are strong, Avery. You always have been. Candace couldn't handle the pressure of debt. You will survive it. You are resilient." He wasn't being duped. He wasn't a victim of Graham's charm. Dean was Graham's partner. They were two wolves agreeing to share the sheep, and I was the sheep. "I am not signing," I said. It wasn't a scream. It was a statement of fact. Dean's face hardened. The mask fell completely. "You will sign," he said, his voice dropping to a growl. "Tomorrow morning, because if you don't, I won't just cut your tuition. I will destroy you. I will make sure you never work in this town." I will tell everyone you stole from the family. I will ruin your reputation before you even get your diploma." He took a step toward me. "You are in my house, Avery. You are playing by my rules. You think you are smart because you found a few Google articles. I've been playing this game since before you were born. Do not test me." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had raised me, the man I had spent my whole life trying to please. And I realized that man didn't exist. He was just a suit filled with greed. "I understand," I said. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I turned and walked out of the library. "Where are you going?" Dean barked. "To my room," I said without looking back, "to think about the signature." I walked up the stairs. I felt lightheaded. I had come here to save my tuition. Then I had tried to save the family from a scammer. Now I realized there was no family to save. Dean and Graham deserved each other, but Candace was the only innocent one left. She was shallow. Yes, she was mean. Yes, but she didn't know she was being sold like livestock. I reached my room and locked the door. I sat on the bed. I wasn't going to run. Running wasn't enough anymore. Dean had said I was resilient. He had said I would survive. He was right. I would survive, but he wouldn't. I picked up my phone. I texted Sarah at the legal clinic. "It is worse than we thought. My father is a co-conspirator. I need to file a preemptive fraud report with the Attorney General's office. And I need a notary who isn't on my father's peril." I looked at the dress hanging on the back of the door, the ugly, expensive bridesmaid dress I was supposed to wear while they signed my life away. I wasn't going to wear it to a wedding. I was going to wear it to an execution, and for the first time in history, the person being executed wouldn't be the ones standing in front of the firing squad. It would be the ones holding the guns. The air in the library was stagnant, smelling of old paper and the scotch Dean had been nursing since noon. The sun had begun its descent, casting long, bruised shadows across the Persian rug. I had been summoned. It was the moment I had been anticipating since I'd overheard the conversation in the hallway, the moment the trap would be sprung. But Dean didn't know that I was the one holding the spring. "Sit down," Dean said. He didn't look up from the desk. I sat in the stiff leather chair opposite him. On the desk, the clutter was gone. There was only one object, a blue folder lying open. Inside was the document I had photographed earlier, the unconditional personal guarantee. He wasn't hiding it anymore. He wasn't slipping it under a stack of trust amendments. He was putting the gun right on the table. "We need to get this done," Dean said, sliding the folder toward me. He uncapped a heavy Mont Blanc pen and placed it on top of the paper. "The bank needs the scan by 500 or the funds won't clear for the vendors on Monday. I don't want to be writing bad checks to the caterer. Avery." I looked at the document. The words joint and several liabilities seemed to pulse on the page. "This is the loan guarantee," I said, keeping my voice steady, feigning a tremor of anxiety. "The one that makes me responsible if things go wrong." Dean waved a hand dismissively. "It is a formality. Graham's assets are tied up in escrow until the merger is finalized next month. The bank just needs a liquidity assurance, a warm body with a clean record. You are basically a placeholder. Once Graham's funds unlock, we refinance and your name is off the paper in 30 days. You won't even know it happened." He was lying so effortlessly. 30 days. There was no merger. There were no funds. In 30 days, I would be $2 million in debt, and he would be counting his cut. "But surely," I said, playing the hesitant daughter, "if Graham has so much capital, why can't he use his own collateral? Or why can't you sign it?" Dean's eyes hardened. The benevolent father act evaporated. He leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the desk. "We are not doing this again," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I am not asking you for a favor, Avery. I am telling you what is required to maintain your position in this family." "By position, I asked your tuition," Dean said. "Your apartment, the car you drive, the food you eat, it all comes from me. You have 1 year left at Bryanston. Do you want to finish it, or do you want to be waiting tables at a diner next month while your classmates are getting hired by top firms?" He let the threat hang in the air. He thought it was his ace in the hole. He didn't know I had already folded that hand and drawn a new deck. I'm scared, Dad," I said, widening my eyes. $2 million is a lot of money. It is only a lot if you have to pay it, Dean snapped. Which you won't unless you refuse to sign, in which case the price of your defiance is your future. I will cut you off. Avery, tonight I will cancel your cards. I will rescind the lease guarantee. You will walk out of this house with nothing but the clothes on your back. He stared at me, waiting for me to break. He wanted tears. He wanted submission instead. The door behind me burst open. Is she doing it again? It was Candace. She stormed into the room, a vision of bridal hysteria. Her hair was half set in curlers, and she was wearing a silk robe that cost more than my first car. Her face was blotchy from crying. Candace, Dean said, his voice softening instantly. Go back upstairs. I am handling your sister. No, Candace shrieked, marching over to the desk. She looked at me with pure venom. Why are you always like this? Why do you have to make everything so difficult? Graham is stressed out of his mind. Dad is drinking at 2:00 in the afternoon, and you are sitting here reading fine print like some lawyer. Candace, this document puts me in debt for $2 million, I said calmly. It is not fine print. It is a life sentence. It is a business deal, she screamed. Graham explained it to me. It is just leverage. Why can't you trust anyone? You are so selfish. Avery, you have always been selfish. Mom would be so ashamed of you right now. The mention of our mother was a tactical nuke. Candace knew it. Dean knew it. They watched me, waiting for the impact. I let my shoulders slump. I let my lip tremble. It wasn't hard to summon the emotion. The sadness was real, but not for the reasons they thought. I was sad because my sister was so desperate to be loved that she was willing to feed me to the wolves. I don't want to ruin your wedding, I whispered, looking down at my hands. Then sign the paper, Candace pleaded, grabbing my arm. Her grip was tight, frantic. Please, Avery, for me. If you don't sign, Graham says the funding falls through. We lose the venue. We lose the house. Do you want to be the reason I don't get married? Do you want to be the reason Dad loses everything? I stammered, looking from Candace's tear-streaked face to Dean's cold, expectant glare. I can't do it right now. I am shaking. I can't hold the pen. Dean slammed his hand on the desk. Sign the damn paper. Avery, I will. I cried out, standing up and backing away. I will sign it. Just please give me tonight. I need to calm down. I need to sleep. I promise. I will sign it tomorrow morning before the hair and makeup starts. First thing, just let me have one night to breathe. Dean looked at me. He saw the fear in my eyes and mistook it for compliance. He saw a broken girl asking for a few hours of reprieve before the execution. He checked his watch. The bank is closed now anyway. The scan would have to wait until morning regardless. He picked up the folder and locked it back in his drawer. He pocketed the key. Fine, Dean said. Tomorrow morning, 8:00 sharp. If you are not in this chair with a pen in your hand, don't bother coming down at all. You can just pack your bags and leave. Thank you, I whispered. You better not embarrass me tomorrow. Candace hissed, wiping her eyes. Fix your face, Avery. You look miserable. She turned and swept out of the room. Dean didn't look at me again. He was already pouring another drink. I walked out of the library, my legs feeling heavy, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the performance. I climbed the stairs to my room, passing the portraits of my ancestors who watched me with silent judgment. I went inside, locked the door, and then dragged the heavy armchair in front of it. I wasn't taking any chances. The room was dark, lit only by the street lamps outside. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the floor with my laptop, the screen glow illuminating my face. It was time to sever the cord. I opened the email from the Bristow Financial Aid Office. The new award letter was there. Federal Direct Unsubsidized Loan Departmental Grant Work-Study Approval. It was enough. It was tight. I would be eating ramen for a year, but it was enough to pay the tuition and the rent on a cheap studio apartment. I clicked Accept Award. The green banner flashed across the screen. Transaction complete. Funds will disperse September 1st. I let out a breath. I felt like I had been holding for 10 years. Dean's leverage was gone. He could cut me off, scream, threaten, and burn the house down. I was going to graduate, but I wasn't done. Defense was only half the battle. I opened a new tab and navigated to the credit bureau's fraud portal. I had already placed a freeze on my reports yesterday, but now I needed to file the formal dispute for the inquiries Dean had made. I pulled up the detailed credit report I had downloaded. I started scrolling through the inquiries section, the log of everyone who had tried to access my credit history in the last year. I expected to see the recent hits from the bank Graham was using. I expected to see the checks from the last 2 weeks, but as I scrolled back, my blood turned to ice. February 12th, attempted access invalid password. March 4th, attempted access security question failed. April 10th, application for personal line of credit denied identity verification failed. April 11th, application for student refinancing denied signature mismatch. I stared at the dates. February, that was 4 months ago. That was when I had come home for a weekend visit. And Dean had been surprisingly nice, asking about my apartment and my social security number for tax purposes. He hadn't just decided to use me because Candace was tapped out last week. This wasn't a desperate last-minute decision made under the pressure of a wedding deadline. He had been trying to steal my identity for months. He had tried to take out loans in my name back in April. He had tried to refinance my student loans to cash out the equity. The only reason he hadn't succeeded was because I had rigorous security settings on my accounts that he couldn't bypass from his computer. That was why he needed me here. That was why the ultimatum. He didn't bring me home to be a bridesmaid. He brought me home because he physically needed my hand to bypass the security protocols he had been banging his head against for half a year. The tuition threat wasn't a punishment for my reluctance to attend the wedding. It was a calculated maneuver to force me into the room where the pen was waiting. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. It was the death of the last tiny shred of hope. I had held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, my father was a desperate man making a mistake. He wasn't desperate. He was predatory. He had been hunting me since Christmas. I closed the laptop. I didn't cry. I was past crying. You don't cry when you realize the wolf is in the room. You load the gun. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the bank's fraud department. It was late, but the 24-hour line was active. Chase Fraud Prevention. This is Marcus. A voice answered. Hi, Marcus. I said my voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. My name is Avery Alexander. I am calling to report an active conspiracy to commit wire fraud and identity theft. I need to place a victim statement on my file immediately, and I need to flag a pending application from Vidian Capital that is being submitted tomorrow morning under my name. Okay, ma'am, Marcus said, his typing clicking in the background. Do you have the application number? I have the document, I said. I have photos of the contract, the terms, and the unauthorized use of my personal information. I can upload them to your secure portal right now. That would be very helpful, Marcus said. If you flag this, any attempt to execute that contract will trigger an automatic referral to federal law enforcement. Are you sure you want to proceed? This usually involves a police report. I looked at the door, barricaded against the family that slept down the hall. I thought about Candace's tears, which were just manipulation wrapped in silk. I thought about Dean's smile as he threatened to destroy my future. I am sure. I said, flag it. And Marcus. Yes, ma'am. If the bank calls the applicant to verify the signature tomorrow, I said, tell them to wait. Tell them the signatory will be making a statement in person. We can do that, Marcus said. I hung up. I lay down on the bed, fully clothed. I knew I wouldn't sleep. The house was silent, but it was the silence of a tomb. Dean thought he had won. He thought he had a scared little girl trapped in a corner, ready to sign away her life at 8:00 in the morning. He didn't know that the girl he was waiting for had already left the building. The woman who would walk down those stairs tomorrow wasn't his daughter anymore. She was the witness for the prosecution. The morning of the wedding did not dawn. It exploded. At 6:00, the sun was barely over the horizon, but the estate was already vibrating with the manic energy of a film set running behind schedule. The air in the bridal suite smelled of burnt hair, aerosol hairspray, and anxiety. I was not a person that morning. I was a logistics node. I was a coat hanger. I was a target. Avery, where are the steamers? The veils are wrinkled. Avery, the photographer needs the shot list. Avery, move your car. The florists can't unload the arch. I moved through the chaos with the efficiency of a robot. I fetched the steamers. I printed the lists. I moved the car. I wore a pair of oversized sunglasses to hide the fact that I hadn't slept in 30 hours. My phone was burning a hole in my pocket, vibrating every few minutes with encrypted updates from the bank and the university, but I couldn't look at it yet. I had to wait for the eye of the storm. Candace sat in the center of the room, a queen bee surrounded by a swarm of makeup artists. She looked terrifyingly beautiful. Her skin was airbrushed to porcelain perfection. Her eyes widened with false lashes. Her hair sculpted into a gravity-daying wave, but her hands were shaking every time she reached for her mimosa. The glass trembled just enough to make the liquid ripple. "You look great, Candace," I said, dropping a bag of emergency sewing kits onto the vanity. "I look tired," she snapped, staring at her reflection. "Do I look tired?" Graham said the lighting in the chapel is unforgiving. "If I look tired, the photos will be ruined." "You look perfect." I lied. "Graham will be blown away." She didn't answer. She just stared at herself, as if trying to find the stranger in the mirror. I turned to leave, needing to find a quiet corner to check my notifications, but a hand clamped down on my upper arm. It was a grip I knew better than my own name, Dean. He dragged me out of the suite and into the narrow servants' hallway that ran behind the bedrooms. He was already in his tuxedo, looking dapper and patrician, but his eyes were hard flints of coal. "We are out of time," he hissed. He pushed me into a small linen closet and kicked the door shut. The space was cramped, smelling of lavender sachets and mothballs. He pulled a folder from inside his tuxedo jacket, the same blue folder from yesterday, and slapped it onto a stack of folded towels. He uncapped a pen and shoved it into my hand. "Sign it," he commanded. "Now the courier is waiting in the driveway to run this to the bank before the ceremony starts. They need to process the pre-approval before noon." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the physical ambush. "Dad," I said, my voice breathless, "I can't sign this here. The lighting is bad. My hand is shaking from the coffee. I don't care if you sign it in blood." Avery Dean snarled, leaning into my face. "Just put your name on the line. Do not test me. We discussed this. You sign. You get your tuition. You don't sign. You are dead to me." I looked at the document. The unconditional personal guarantee. It looked even more lethal in the dim light of the closet. I gripped the pen. I needed one last confirmation. I needed him to say it. "Who is this for, really?" I asked, looking him dead in the eye. "Is it for the wedding or is it for Candace?" Dean let out a frustrated groan. "It is for the package. Avery, for the post-wedding consolidation. Graham needs the liquidity to merge the accounts after they get back from the honeymoon. It secures the real estate transfer for their new house. It is for their future." There it was. Post-wedding consolidation. He wasn't just patching a hole. He was financing a long-term merger of debt. He was admitting that the plan extended far beyond this weekend. He was locking me into a future where I would be the silent partner in their bankruptcy for years to come. "Okay," I said softly. "I understand." I lowered the pen to the paper. I hovered the tip over the signature line. Dean stopped breathing, his eyes fixed on the ink. "Avery Dean, the videographer is here. They need the father-daughter first look shot now." The wedding planner's voice screeched from the hallway, followed by the heavy thud of footsteps. I pulled the pen back. "They are coming," I whispered. "If they see us in a closet with financial papers, it will look weird on the behind-scenes video." Dean froze. He cared about the optics more than the money. He cared about the image of the perfect father more than the reality of the solvency. "Fine," he spat, snatching the folder back. "We will do it in the limo on the way to the church. You ride with me. No arguments." He shoved the folder back into his jacket and opened the door, instantly transforming his scowl into a benevolent smile as the camera crew rounded the corner. "There is my princess," he boomed, extending a hand to me for the benefit of the lens. I took his hand, I smiled, and inside I was screaming with triumph. I had bought myself an hour. I excused myself, claiming I needed to use the restroom before I got into my dress. I ran to the guest bathroom, my command center, and locked the door. I pulled out my phone. My hands were trembling, but I forced my fingers to work. Notification 1. Bryanston University status enrolled. Financial aid disbursed pending September 1st. I was safe. The tuition threat was a ghost. Notification 2. Chase fraud alert. Status active. Victim statement recorded. Monitoring for Vidian capital application. The trap was armed. I opened my cloud storage and uploaded the audio file I had recorded in the closet. Dean admitting the loan was for post-wedding consolidation. I sent the link to Sarah at the legal aid clinic. He just confirmed it on tape. He is trying to coerce me in the limo. I am going into the lion's den. Sarah, don't sign. If he forces your hand physically, spoil the signature. Scribble. Tear the paper. But the bank alert should flag it. Even if you do, stay safe. I splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't look like a victim anymore. I looked like a hunter. I unlocked the door and stepped out. The hallway was full of people. I navigated through the crowd of bridesmaids who were all cooing over their bouquets. "Excuse me," a deep voice said. I stopped. A man blocked my path. He was older, 60 perhaps, wearing a suit that cost more than my education. He had silver hair and the cold, dead eyes of a shark. I recognized him from the party. "Mr. Sterling, the investor. You are the sister," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am," I said. "Avery." "Right." Sterling said. He didn't offer a hand. He just looked me up and down as if assessing the value of a used car. "Graham tells me you are the key to the structural integrity of the deal." My stomach dropped. "The deal. The financing," Sterling said, lowering his voice slightly. "I represent the private equity group backing Graham's bridge loan. We were hesitant given the history, but Graham assured us he had a guarantor with a pristine record and high projected earnings. That is you, correct?" He knew. They all knew. It wasn't just Dean and Graham. The investors knew I was the Psy. They were all standing around drinking champagne, waiting for the college student to sign her life away so they could get their return on investment. "I am the sister," I repeated, my voice ice cold. "I am just here to hold the flowers." Sterling chuckled, a dry rattling sound. "Modesty is a virtue, but make sure that pen works, sweetheart. A lot of people are waiting on that ink." He patted my arm, a patronizing, heavy tap, and walked away toward the bar. I stood there watching his back. The scale of it hit me. This wasn't a family drama. This was a corporate raid. I was the asset being stripped. "Avery, get dressed. We are leaving in 20 minutes. Candace's voice broke my trance. I walked into the dressing room. My dress was hanging on the door. It was a pale dusty pink, the color of submission, a floor-length gown designed to make me blend into the background, to be a soft accessory to Candace's brilliance. Candace was already in her wedding gown. She looked breathtaking, but her eyes were manic. "Look," she said, pulling me over to the window. She pointed to a photo on her phone. "Graham just sent me this, the listing for the house in Greenwich. He says he put the offer in this morning. 5 bedrooms, Avery, a pool. It is happening. We are actually going to have it all." I looked at the photo of the mansion. It was beautiful. It was expensive. "Who is on the title?" "Candace." I asked quietly. "But—" She frowned, not looking up from the screen. "The deed," I said. "Whose name is on the deed, Graham's or the trust?" "I don't know." She laughed nervously. "What does it matter? We are married. What is his is mine." I looked at her. She really believed it. She believed in the fairy tale. She didn't know that the house in Greenwich was being bought with the credit Dean was trying to steal from me. She didn't know that she wasn't the mistress of the manor. She was just another prop to secure the loan. "It matters," I said. "It matters a lot." "You are such a killjoy." Candace sighed, putting the phone away. "Just put on your dress and try to look happy for 5 minutes. Can you do that?" "I can do that," I said. I took the pink dress off the hanger. The fabric felt cool and slippery in my hands. I stripped off my jeans and sweater. I stepped into the gown. I pulled the zipper up. It was tight, constricting my ribs. It was designed to restrict movement, to keep me poised and upright. I looked in the full-length mirror. The dress fit perfectly. I looked like the perfect bridesmaid, the loyal sister, the obedient daughter. Dean would see this reflection and think he had won. He would think the armor was gone, that I was soft and vulnerable. He was wrong. I wasn't putting on a dress. I was putting on a costume underneath the pink chiffon. I was wired for sound. I checked the small pocket sewn into the lining, a modification I had made myself with a needle and thread last night. I slid my phone into it. It was recording. "Avery limo now," Dean shouted from downstairs. I took a deep breath. "Punning, Dad," I called back. I grabbed my bouquet. I took one last look at the room. The chaos, the excess, the lies. They wanted me to stand next to the bride. They wanted me to be the silent support beam that held up their rotting house. I walked to the door. I would stand there. I would smile. I would hold the flowers. And then when they handed me the microphone, I would burn it all down. I walked out of the room and headed for the stairs, the sound of my heels clicking like the ticking of a clock. The countdown had ended. The explosion was beginning. The reception was a masterclass in deception. It was held in the massive climate-controlled tent on the South Lawn, a structure of white silk and crystal chandeliers that had cost more than the average American annual salary. The air was frigid, pumped in by industrial air conditioners to combat the June heat, and it smelled of expensive lees and impending financial ruin. I sat at the head table, my pink chiffon dress spreading out around me like a pool of spilled medicine. To my right, Candace was laughing, her head thrown back, exposing the long, elegant line of her throat. She looked radiant. She believed the lie. She believed she was the princess in the castle, not the bait in the trap. To her left, Graham sat with the relaxed, predatory ease of a man who thinks the check has already cleared, and Dean, my father, sat at the far end of the table, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. He caught my eye and raised his glass in a subtle triumphant salute. He thought he had won. In the limousine on the way over, I had played the part of the terrified, broken daughter perfectly. I had sobbed. I had trembled. I had told him that I would sign the papers the moment the speeches were over, right here at the table, so the investors could see us united. He had bought it. He was so desperate for the win, so blinded by his own arrogance, that he didn't question why I wanted an audience for my surrender. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice boomed through the speakers, overly enthusiastic and slick. "If we could settle down, please, we have a very special treat. The maid of honor, the bride's sister, Avery Alexander, would like to say a few words." Polite applause rippled through the room. I saw Mr. Sterling at table 4, checking his watch. He looked bored. He was waiting for the signature, not the sentiment. I stood up. My legs felt solid. The trembling that had plagued me all week was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I picked up the microphone. I didn't need notes. I had been writing this speech in my head for 3 years. I walked to the center of the dance floor. The spotlight hit me blindingly white. I shielded my eyes for a second, then lowered my hand and smiled. It was a soft, nostalgic smile. "Hi, everyone," I said. My voice was steady, amplified to fill the silent tent. "For those of you who don't know me, I am Avery, Candace's little sister." I looked at Candace. She beamed at me, her eyes wet with happy tears. She mouthed, "I love you." When we were little, I began, pitching my voice to be warm and intimate. Candace and I used to play a game called Castle. She was always the queen. I was always the knight. My job was to slay the dragons and make sure the walls were safe so she could rule in peace. Candace has always been the dreamer. She sees the world in gold and diamonds. A collective ore rose from the aunts and cousins. Dean nodded, looking pleased. This was the script. This was the good daughter routine. And our father, I continued, turning slightly to face Dean, taught us how to build those castles. He taught us that family is the most important thing in the world. He taught us that sacrifices have to be made to keep the legacy alive. Dean's smile widened. He took a sip of his drink. "But," I said, and I let the word hang there for a second. The tone shifted. It wasn't a drastic drop, just a subtle change in frequency, like a violin string being tightened until it was ready to snap. He also taught me that love is transactional. The room went quiet. Dean's glass paused halfway to his mouth. "I stand here today," I said, looking out at the crowd, meeting the eyes of the investors, because of a very specific lesson my father taught me this week. He taught me that my education, my future, and my autonomy are currency. You see, 5 days ago my father called me and told me that if I didn't come to this wedding, he would cut off my tuition for my final year of graduate school. A murmur ran through the room. It was low, confused. People thought it was a joke, a dark bit of roast humor. I didn't smile. I thought it was just tough love, I continued, my voice sharpening, cutting through the confusion. But then I found out the price of admission was just my presence. It was my credit score. Dean stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Avery," he warned, his voice a low growl that the microphone picked up faintly. "Sit down." I ignored him. I turned to the table where Mr. Sterling and the other business partners were sitting. "Mr. Sterling," I said pleasantly, "you asked me earlier if I was ready to be the structural integrity of the deal. The answer is no. I am not signing the unconditional personal guarantee for the $2 million bridge loan that my father and Graham are trying to secure today." The room gasped. It wasn't a polite gas. It was the sound of oxygen being sucked out of a vacuum. Mr. Sterling froze, his fork hovering over his plate. "Avery," Dean shouted, moving around the table, "that is enough. You are drunk." "I am stone cold sober, Dad," I said, stepping back so the spotlight followed me, keeping me out of his reach. "And I have the documents." I pulled my phone from the pocket of my dress. I held it up. "I have the photos of the loan application where you forged my initials," I said, speaking faster now, driving the nails in. "I have the logs from the credit bureau showing that you, Dean Alexander, have been trying to use my social security number to open lines of credit since February because your own credit is ruined. You didn't invite me here to celebrate. You invited me here because you needed a fresh host to parasite off of." "Cut the mic," Dean screamed at the sound technician. "Cut it now." The sound guy was a 20-year-old kid who looked terrified. He fumbled with the board, but I spoke over the feedback. "I have already reported the fraud to the Briarstone Financial Aid Office and the fraud department at Chase Bank," I shouted, my voice ringing off the rafters. "My files are frozen. The loan is dead. There is no guarantee coming. There is no money coming." Dean lunged for me. He actually lunged. His face was purple with rage. I sidestepped him. I was younger, faster, and I wasn't weighed down by a lifetime of scotch and lies. He stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the cake table. The towering white confection wobbled. The room was in chaos. People were standing up. The investors were already pulling out their phones, making frantic calls. Candace was sitting at the table, frozen. She looked like a statue made of ice that was beginning to crack. "Avery," she whispered, her voice amplified by the mic still in my hand. "What are you doing? You are ruining everything." I looked at her. I felt a pang of pity, but I strangled it. Kitty wouldn't save her. Only the truth would. "I am not done, Candace," I said. I turned to Graham. The groom hadn't moved. He was sitting very still, his face a mask of pale wax. He knew. He knew exactly what was coming. "Graham," I said, "or should I call you Gray? That is the name you used in Arizona, isn't it? When you stiffed the contractors on the Desert Ridge project for $400,000. Graham stood up slowly. "This is slander," he said, his voice tight. "I will sue you." "You can't sue me with money you don't have," I shot back. "And you certainly can't sue me when you are already being investigated for the scheme you pulled on Meyer's family in Narper 18 months ago." The name hit him like a physical blow. He flinched. "Meyer called me." "Graham," I said to the room, "she told me how you get engaged to women with family assets, convince their fathers to co-sign loans for your ventures, and then vanish when the cash clears. It is a Ponzi scheme built on wedding vows." I turned back to the crowd. "There is no merger. There is no IPO. Graham Klein is a ghost. The company GK Holdings is a mailbox in a strip mall. He is paying for this wedding with a promise of money that he was going to steal from me." Mr. Sterling stood up abruptly. He didn't look at Dean. He didn't look at Graham. He looked at his associates. "We are leaving," he said. "Hold a term sheet now." The group of men in suits marched out of the tent like a funeral procession. The venue manager, Brender, was standing near the entrance. I saw her face go white. She realized the check for the post-wedding payment was never going to clear. She started speaking frantically into her radio, presumably calling security or the police. Dean was panting, leaning against the table. He looked old. He looked defeated, but he looked at me with pure hatred. "You ungrateful bitch," he spat. "I gave you everything. You gave me a bill, I corrected him, and I am refusing to pay it." I turned to Candace. This was the hardest part. This was the part that would break her. She was standing now. She was looking at Graham, who was frantically typing on his phone, ignoring her. She looked at Dean, who was glaring at me. "Candace," I said softly. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, terrified holes in her perfect face. "I know you think this is just me being jealous," I said. "I know you think Dad is the victim here, but I need you to answer one question." I pointed at Dean. "Ask him." I said, "Ask Dad if he knew." "Knew what?" Candace whispered. "Ask him if he knew Graham was a fraud." I said, "Ask him if he knew about Arizona and Narper, because when I told him yesterday, he didn't look surprised. He told me it was a business transaction. He told me he was willing to sell you to a con man just to get half the proceeds of the loan." Candace turned slowly to face Dean. "Daddy," she asked. Her voice was the voice of a 6-year-old girl. "Is that true?" "Did you know?" Dean straightened his jacket. He tried to summon the patriarch one last time. "Candace, sweetheart," he said, his voice wheedling. "It is complicated. Business is messy. Graham and I had an understanding. We were going to protect you. We were going to make sure the family stayed solvent. It was for the house. It was for you." He didn't say no. The silence that followed was louder than the screaming had been. Candace looked at the man she had worshipped for 30 years. She looked at the man who had pitted us against each other, who had groomed her to be a trophy and me to be a scapegoat. And for the first time in her life, she saw him. She didn't scream. She didn't faint. She just recoiled. She took a step back, as if he were physically repulsive. "You knew," she breathed. "You were going to let me marry a thief so you could pay off your debts." "It wasn't like that," Dean insisted, stepping toward her. "Don't touch me," Candace shrieked. It was a raw primal sound that tore through the silk tent. "Get away from me." Graham saw the tide turning. He saw the investors leaving. He saw the security guards moving in from the perimeter. "Candace, baby." Graham started, reaching for her hand. "Let's just go. We can explain everything." Candace looked at him. She looked at the diamond ring on her finger, the ring bought with credit that was probably already in default. She pulled it off. It wasn't a graceful gesture. She yanked it over her knuckle, scratching her skin. She threw it at him. It hit him in the chest and bounced onto the floor. "Get out," she hissed. The room was dissolving. Guests were whispering. Some were filming with their phones. Others were rushing to the exits to avoid the scandal. The illusion was gone. The castle had fallen. I looked at the wreckage I had caused. I saw my father, broken and exposed. I saw my sister, devastated but finally awake. I saw the man who had tried to enslave me, scrambling to find an exit strategy. I felt a strange hollow peace. I looked at the microphone in my hand. I didn't need it anymore. "I came to the wedding," I said, my voice dropping to a normal volume, though the speaker still carried it to the stunned room. "I came because you threatened me, but I stayed to make sure that when this house of cards fell, I wasn't the one underneath it." I placed the microphone on the table. It made a dull thud, the sound of a gavel coming down. "I also came to save myself," I said to the empty air. I turned my back on the head table. I walked down the steps of the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. No one said a word. No one tried to stop me. I walked past Mrs. Higgins, who was clutching her pearls. I walked past the cousins who had called me a failure. I walked past the empty chair where Mr. Sterling had been. I walked out of the tent and into the humid night air. The music inside had stopped. The only sound was the hum of the generator and the pounding of my own heart, beating a rhythm of survival. I was free. The check had bounced. The guarantee was unsigned, and the truth was finally irrevocably out. The humidity outside the tent was suffocating, a heavy blanket of night air that pressed against my skin, but for the first time in my life, I could breathe. I walked across the manicured lawn toward the main house, my heels sinking into the soft earth. leaving small divots of destruction in the perfect landscape. Avery, you get back here. Dean's voice was a ragged tear in the darkness. He was stumbling after me, his tuxedo jacket flapping open, his face a rich of panic and rage. He didn't look like the master of the universe anymore. He looked like a man whose house was burning down and who had decided to scream at the fire instead of calling for water. I am talking to you, he roared, grabbing my shoulder and spinning me around. You think you can just walk away after what you did? I am cutting you off. Do you hear me? I am calling the bursar on Monday morning. I am canceling the lease. You won't see a dime of my money ever again. I looked at his hand on my shoulder. It was shaking. Dean, I said, using his first name. It felt strange, like spitting out a piece of glass. You don't have any money to cut off, and even if you did, I don't need it. You need me, he spat, though his eyes darted around, terrified that the guests streaming out of the tent were watching. You are a student. You are nothing without my support. I have support, I said calmly. I just checked my portal. The university approved my independent status request 5 minutes ago. My tuition is covered by federal loans and a work-study grant. I will be scrubbing test tubes to pay for my rent, but I will own every single hour of my time. You don't own me anymore. Dean stepped back as if I had slapped him. The leverage was gone. The strings he had pulled for 27 years had been severed. You ungrateful little Dean. The scream came from behind him. It was Candace. She was running across the lawn, holding the skirts of her ruined wedding dress. Graham was trailing behind her, looking annoyed rather than devastated. He was checking his phone, likely looking for a flight to a non-extradition country. Candace stopped a few feet away from us. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She looked at Graham, then at Dean. Tell me it isn't true, she pleaded, her voice breaking. Tell me Avery is lying. Tell me you didn't sell me to him. Dean opened his mouth, his instinct to manipulate kicking in. Candace, sweetheart, listen. Oh, give it a rest, Dean. Graham interrupted. He shoved his phone into his pocket and looked at Candace with a sneer. The gig is up. The investors have pulled the term sheet. The bridge loan is dead. There is no point in keeping up the act. Candace stared at him. The act? We were getting married. We were merging. Graham corrected her coldly. And frankly, it was a bad merger. Your credit is garbage. Candace, I was doing Dean a favor by taking you on. We needed a guarantor because you maxed out 3 cards buying shoes. You were a liability I was willing to overlook for the sake of the $2 million. But now, he shrugged. Now you are just a woman in a dress I can't afford to pay for. The cruelty of it was absolute. It wasn't just a rejection. It was an invalidation of her entire existence. You used me, Candace whispered. We used each other, Graham said, turning to walk toward the parking lot. You wanted the Greenwich house and the status. I wanted the liquidity. Don't pretend you were in it for my personality. He didn't look back. He walked away into the dark, a cockroach scurrying for cover before the lights came on fully. Candace stood there shaking. She turned to Dean. She looked for the father who was supposed to protect her from monsters like Graham. You knew, she said. You knew he thought I was a liability. Dean ran a hand through his silver hair. He looked desperate. Candace, we have to be practical. The family is in a hole, a deep hole. I did what I had to do to save the estate, to save your lifestyle. Do you think this life is free? Do you think the country club dues pay themselves? I made a strategic decision. I am your daughter, Candace screamed. I am not a strategy. We are a family, Dean shouted back, his face turning purple. And families make sacrifices. Avery wouldn't step up, so I had to improvise. If you walk away now, Candace, we lose everything. But if we stick together, maybe we can spin this. We can tell the press Avery had a mental breakdown. We can sue Graham for breach of promise. We can salvage the narrative. He was still doing it. Standing in the wreckage of his own making, he was still trying to draft a press release. Candace looked at him. For 30 years, she had been the golden child, the reflection of his vanity. But now, the mirror was broken. I am not helping you spin this, she said. Her voice was quiet. Dick, I am going to the hotel. Do not follow me. Candace. Dean grabbed for her arm. She recoiled, stumbling back in her heels. I said, "Don't touch me. You are sick. You are both sick." She turned and began to walk toward the driveway, weeping. She didn't look at me. She was too ashamed. Dean stood alone on the lawn. He looked at me. His eyes were empty holes. "Are you happy?" he asked. "You destroyed this family." "No," I said. "I just turned on the lights. You are the one who filled the room with monsters." I walked past him. I didn't feel triumph. I felt exhaustion. But it was a clean exhaustion, the kind that comes after scrubbing a deep stain out of a floor. I went into the house. It was eerie. The staff was gone. The caterers had packed up and left the moment the news of the insolvency broke. The house was silent, a mausoleum of lost fortunes. I went upstairs to my room. I stripped off the pink dress. I left it in a pile on the floor. I put on my jeans, my sneakers, and a plain white t-shirt. I packed my bag in 3 minutes. I had never unpacked fully anyway. I had always known I wouldn't be staying. I grabbed my laptop. I checked my email one last time from Sarah. Legal Aid Clinic. Subject update. The fraud alert is active. The bank has frozen all pending applications connected to your SSN. I also spoke to a contact at the Attorney General's office. They are opening a file on GK Holdings. You are in the clear. Avery, go live your life. I closed the laptop. I walked down the hall to Dean's study. The door was open. I walked in. I wasn't looking for money. I was looking for my identity. I opened the top drawer of his desk. I took my passport. I took my birth certificate. I took the physical copy of my Social Security card. As I was shuffling through the papers, my hand brushed against a thin blue envelope tucked at the very back of the drawer. It had my name on it. The handwriting was familiar. It was looped, elegant, cursive. It was my mother's handwriting. My breath hitched. I pulled the envelope out. It had been opened. Dean had read it. I pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. It was a statement from a custodial savings account I didn't know existed. It was dated 10 years ago, just before she died. For Avery, my rainy day girl, I know you will be the one who needs to leave. This isn't much, but it is yours. Don't let him touch it. Attached was a bank slip for a dormant account. The balance was $25,000. It wasn't millions. It wasn't enough to buy a house in Greenwich. To a graduate student who had just cut herself off from her family fortune, it was everything. It was a safety net. It was a ticket out. Dean had hidden it. He had kept it in this drawer for a decade, probably planning to drain it when he got desperate enough, but he hadn't touched it yet. Perhaps because he forgot, or perhaps because even he had lines he hesitated to cross. I put the paper in my pocket. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Thanks, Mom," I whispered. I walked out of the study. I walked down the stairs. I walked out the front door. My car was parked in the driveway, blocked in by the catering trucks earlier, but now the path was clear. I threw my bag into the passenger seat. "Avery," I turned. Candace was standing by the gate. She hadn't left yet. She was waiting for a ride share, leaning against the stone pillar, looking like a broken doll. She walked over to my car. Her makeup was ruined. Her dress was torn at the hem. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Briarstone," I said. "I have a thesis to finish." She nodded. She looked at the ground. She looked at her hands, which were bare of rings. "He told me he loved me," she said softly. "Graham, he was so convincing. I thought I was finally doing something right. I thought I was winning." "That is how the trap works, Candace," I said. "It has to look like a prize." She looked up at me. Her eyes were searching my face, looking for the sister she had bullied, the sister she had treated like a servant for the last week. "How long did you know?" she asked. It wasn't an apology. She wasn't ready for that yet. She was still processing the shock. She wanted to know how long. I had been watching her walk toward the cliff. "I suspected something on Tuesday," I said. "I knew for sure yesterday." "And you waited until the speeches?" she asked. A flicker of the old anger sparked in her eyes. "You wanted to humiliate us." "I waited until I had the proof," I said firmly. "If I had told you yesterday, would you have believed me? Or would you have called me jealous and signed the papers anyway?" Candace opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She looked away. She knew the answer. she would have sighed. She would have dragged us both down because she was addicted to the fantasy. "I didn't ruin your wedding, Candace," I said, opening my car door. "I ruined the trap. You are free. You are broke, and you are going to be embarrassed for a few months, but you are free. You don't have $2 million debt hanging over your head. You have a chance to start over. Don't waste it." I got into the car. "Avery," she called out as I put the key in the ignition. "What am I supposed to do? Dad is losing it. The house is going to be foreclosed. Where do I go?" I looked at her through the open window. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to fix it for her. I wasn't her knight anymore. "You figure it out," I said like I did. I rolled up the window. I started the engine. The sound was a low growl in the quiet night. I put the car in drive. I pulled out of the driveway, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. I watched the estate recede in my rear view mirror. The lights were still on in the main house, casting long, lonely shadows on the lawn where the tent stood like a ghost. I reached for my phone on the passenger seat. I held down the power button. The screen went black. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool air from the vents. It smelled of recycled air and freedom. I didn't know exactly where I would sleep tonight. I didn't know how I would pay for my groceries next month until the work-study check cleared. I didn't know if Dean would try to sue me or if Candace would ever speak to me again. But as I turned onto the highway, merging into the stream of tail lights heading away from that toxic, beautiful prison, I knew one thing for certain. The check Dean Alexander tried to write on my life had bounced, and the woman driving this car was finally completely solvent. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or maybe while getting ready for bed? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed Avery's journey and want to see more stories about justice being served, please make sure to subscribe to the Azad Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it. Stay safe and remember, always read the fine print. Thanks to all.